Can you say hard hats, folks? Hard hats, lunch pail, steel toe boots.
Anything short of a championship this year is a failure.
Look at this boomer right here.
You've just got so much talent here.
Somebody said we need to apologize for Jalen.
Can I close it, John? What are we apologizing for? What did we say? What did we do?
All right. Bobby Manning here. Welcome to a Saturday edition of the Garden Report since it's after midnight. Noah Dalzell here. And what's become a busy day for us is big news in the NBA drops tonight. Knicks acquiring Karl-Anthony Towns. Not something anyone could have pictured happening on the eve of training camp effectively here. And I keep losing you, Noah. You keep going in and out there. But this trade makes sense to me. I get it for both sides. And in all this discussion we've had about what's going on in the East, how are these teams going to challenge the Celtics, I actually said it earlier today after practice to you. I didn't like what the Knicks had at center. I'm not feeling good about this Randle Robinson injury thing. Don't like them losing Hartenstein in their series of moves that they made. And so they go out and go get one of the best centers in the NBA like that. And how does it match up with Boston? What does this end up looking like? Towns is a guy who I've loved and obviously has so many flaws that have driven me crazy because of the fact that I love him and I think he's capable of so much. And he's pretty far into his career at this point, so maybe he's a guy who can't change. But for the first time in his career, he gets a change of scenery. I think he's in a pretty good team that's well-positioned to empower him. And it's exactly what they needed. Like, I was thinking about, could they go out and get Isaiah Stewart for Julius Randle? And they go out and get Karl-Anthony Towns. So you've had a little time to think about it. Where's your mind at with this one now?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and apologies, my internet was cutting out. I think it's because it's midnight, but I think the Knicks win this trade, and I think that you're right. I mean, we've been talking about the Knicks a bunch, and I feel like you have constantly been reminding like the piece about how they are down a center and have another center that they're really relying on that is all, in and out of injuries, and clearly right now he's not available to begin with. So it does give them a little bit more like depth in that position, and like it makes them a little bit more reliable. But the only thing that I keep reminding myself is like DiVincenzo had like kind of established himself as I don't want to say star, but like a mini star at least, and so that's
I had him in my top 100 players going into this year.
Where'd you have him ranked? Do you remember?
Like 100 or so. I'm going to look it up exactly, but he was definitely like 98, 99, 100.
Yeah. I don't know. I
So-
mean, then I'm also thinking about the map, the Timberwolves Nugget series, and I do think that the Timberwolves were better off with Karl-Anthony Towns. He was really important in that series. So like one thing that I was thinking about going into this is like this trade makes a Celtics Nuggets finals more likely, I think.
That's an interesting angle. So yeah, we're going to connect to the Celtics in a bunch of different ways. I think Minnesota takes a hit here for sure, losing Towns, because they built an identity last year and really over the last 2 years of that Towns-Gobert combo. And if you're going to replace Towns, and that's what I think people have to consider here, is Towns is going to be gone eventually in Minnesota no matter what, making $50 million a year. It became Edwards' team, second apron tax, all that stuff. Plus, the new owners signaled that they were going to cut costs pretty soon. And this is a big cost-cutting deal here. Randle makes much less than Towns. So this was going to happen. And if you're going to replace Towns with anybody, I think Randle's a pretty comparable player in terms of skill set. Maybe not as big, tall, that sort of thing, but shoots, handles, okay defender, not much on that end, but at least big enough to defend wing positions. So I think it makes sense for Minnesota to get ahead on that, but it might hurt them a little bit in the short term because I thought Towns was actually pretty good last postseason despite his past playoff struggles. But obviously the biggest impact for the Celtics directly is going to be the Knicks in their backyard. Opening night, Towns is going to be at center for New York for that ring night. And I think he's a pretty good fit on that roster. The shooting, the size. I loved him at center more than this 4 thing that they've been doing with him a couple years now in Minnesota, because I think he's just such a matchup issue for opposing
Yeah.
centers. And, Horford can probably contain him on that night and, do his best, but he can just score boatloads of points. I think he's done a better job drawing back the fouling. I think he's done a better job playing within himself in a role, which he's going to have to do here in New York next to Brunson and all of these other guys. And all of a sudden, you're looking at a New York team that was a little sometimes stagnant, playing a rock fight kind of game in the half court, having a 5-out system. Bridges can shoot threes. Towns can shoot threes. OG can shoot threes. Hart can shoot threes. And obviously Brunson at the point of attack. So we're about to watch some 5-0 basketball between these teams on opening night.
Yeah, I do think, like, the more I think about this trade, the Knicks become the clear. I feel confident saying they're the biggest threat to the Celtics in the East.
And I didn't feel that way this morning.
Yeah. I still kind of thought that, but honestly, this trade does make them better. And it's interesting. I feel like Julius, Randle, and Karl-Anthony Towns are almost both underrated players in a sense. They're both gotten to the point where I feel like they're such like underachieving superstars and moments in their career, even though they've had their high moments too. Like, I don't know. I feel like both their fan bases have been frustrated with them. That this is kind of like a massive star for star trade. In a lot of ways, but it just doesn't have that same feeling that it otherwise would, I think, because of the fact that both of these guys are guys that have been relatively unpopular at points. I do kind of feel for Karl-Anthony Towns, who literally just last year made the conference finals after so many years of losing in Minnesota. And it seemed like I thought that team was one of the most formidable teams of the playoffs. And going into next season, I had them at the top of the list for making a deep run again. And so, but yeah, I mean, it makes sense from the Naz Reid perspective. As soon as they extended Naz Reid, I was thinking to myself, like, okay, so this is not that they're pretty much signal. They're not going to keep those 3 guys long term for that much money. So I don't know. I'm just not that high on Julius Randle. Like, that was honestly something that made me feel good about New York, is that I feel like he has just had so many low playoff moments that just the absence of him is a little bit of an addition in a sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned at the start of the show the health situation there. They entered camp with almost an emergency situation at center there. You think Moose and Porzingis is bad. They lose Hartenstein.
Yeah.
Robinson's out until January, they're saying, in a longer estimate with this ankle injury surgery he's recovering from. And Randle wasn't ready for the beginning of camp. So we'll see how long he's going to be out for Minnesota at this point. They're effectively trading for a guy coming off surgery who's not quite there yet either. So it's another reason there's a step back from Minnesota. But again, money. And I want to connect that to Boston in just a second here. But here's a way to make some money this weekend. A lot of fun college football games coming up. You got a great one tonight between Miami and Virginia Tech that just wrapped up. A crazy ending in that game, but it's all the more fun when you have a daily fantasy sports team involved. And this is our official daily fantasy sports partner here in Prize Picks. That promo you're hearing about, Caleb Williams 1 yard, that's done at the end of this weekend. So this is your last chance to play at a free Caleb Williams square to get you going. You know how it works. 2 or more players pick more or less than their projections, and you can win up to many times your money over at Prize Picks. So go there right now, sign up, play $5 and get $50 instantly. You don't even need to win to get the $50 bonus over at Prize Picks. That's Prize Picks. Again, use that code CLNS for a $50 bonus when you play $5. And game time. It's a wrap for baseball. It's about to be over at Fenway, but plenty of Patriots games coming up. Bruins getting going. Their preseason games are already underway, and in a couple weeks you'll get some Celtics preseason action back here in Boston. It's all available on the Game Time app. Use that code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. You know the deal. You can check out where your seats are. You can get flash deals, zone deals, all different kinds of deals. And upfront pricing is going to show you exactly what you're paying for your tickets here on the Game Time app. And one of my favorite apps to buy seats. I know Noah's used it forever as well. And, love them as a sponsor here. Great experience. Concerts. I got a bunch of concerts I'm looking at coming up, and I'm always going to the Game Time app to see what the best prices are. And they have a Game Time guarantee, so you're guaranteed that best price. So CLNS, $20 off first purchase. Terms apply. It's the Game Time app. Go download today. What time is it? It's game time. Let's go back to the trade here, and it does make me think of one thing too before we go back to like the Celtics Knicks stuff here. This is a money move for Minnesota. They could have done it next year. They could have ran it back and try to figure this out later, but there was no guarantee they were going to be able to get a Julius Randle, who's a cheaper version of Towns, effectively here later, because obviously all the reporting, I think Fisher said the Knicks were going around the league saying, who wants Randle? Who can we get for some center depth here, which makes sense to me. The Celtics, there are like 3 super expensive teams right now, right? Maybe this is like 1 or 2 more, but the Suns, the Celtics, the Wolves are getting there, and the Celtics are going to hit this $500 million thing next summer. And so I knew they were running it back this year, but I was keeping an eye around the league. Like, what's Phoenix going to do? Are they going to trade like Durant or Beal or Booker or something and try to break that up? They run it back. I was really keeping an eye on Minnesota. Are they going to keep Towns? Nope, they keep him until today. They looked like they were going to run it back. And then, of course, the Celtics signed everybody. So the league effectively punted on that second apron thing for the most part, unless you were like the Clippers with George in free agency. And there were no trades from like major trades for money saving purposes. And so I'm like, all right, I guess I'll have to wait till next summer. But here it is. This is the first big, super second apron trade, luxury tax in this modern era trade. And it just makes me think 1 year from today, probably less than a year from today, because it will happen early next summer, feasibly, depending on how this year goes for the Celtics. The Celtics might have to make a trade like this in a year. Like, do you go and get a cheaper version of Porzingis? Do you go and get a cheaper version of Holiday, or several young players who are cheaper than that one player, to just start to scale that cost back a little bit, scale that tax back a little bit? We don't know who the owner is going to be. We don't know what their stomach's going to be for running this team back, even if they win a back-to-back championship here. But this is something that the Celtics might have to do in a year. As shaky as this looks for Minnesota right now, as much of a step back as it is going from Towns to Randle, this is the NBA now. Like, you might be able to do 1 year at $500 million with the right owner, but it's not going to go much longer than that.
Yeah, I don't know why. Every time I see a Luke Cornett in the comment section, it just distracts me so much. He said, "You have me to stop cat." This is like every time, but so I know I've been avoiding this topic because I feel like it's so speculative and it's so big picture, and they literally just won the championship. But I think you're right. It does kind of force the issue of at least thinking about it. Something that I noticed at media day. Did you notice that every single time a player was asked about the ownership, Jalen was asked about it, Drew was asked about it, they played it off like it had zero impact on them? I don't know if that's like a media training point where they were kind of told to be like that, but Jalen was like, best of luck to Wick. Drew was like, I don't know, like, they're kind of downplaying the fact that this is happening, but you have to imagine that in the back of their heads, they know that this could have a ramification of shipping somebody out. And at this point, yeah, like obviously Drew Holiday and Porzingis are the 2 ones that come to mind, because Porzingis, because of the fact that I think he's gonna have the injury things. I don't know how he's gonna pan out this year.
And you don't want to say a name that starts with J.
Yeah, because also, like, why would you?
Right. At least not today. But who knows?
Right
Who
now,
knows what happens over
right.
the course of the next year?
I mean, it's also like last year, I think they both had very good seasons. That one of those could change, right? I mean, knock on wood, they've both been healthy for the last few years. Like, there's so many variables. I think that's why it's such a difficult topic to discuss, because everything's kind of up in the air, right? Like, it's all a projection based off of what next year would look like. The one that I feel really confident, I don't think Derek White's going anywhere, honestly. Like, he's one that I feel like if I had to pick somebody that's staying in Boston, I feel like he's
especially
really
at his value.
Yeah, I think he's just a good contract deal. I think that he's gonna, regardless of who else you have in that starting lineup, like he's gonna fit. So I don't know. I mean, Porzingis and Holiday is gonna be what, 35 next summer?
He's
And there's the
35
question of
this
like,
year, yeah, in June next year, yeah.
so like this offseason he'll be 35. He really
Yeah.
doesn't seem like it. You know?
No,
I
and I
like,
was thinking when we talked to him the other day, I was like, how do you approach being 35 regular season, getting through year after year at this point? Because he's not an injury guy, knock on wood.
yeah.
Doesn't slow down much from shooting or even physical standpoint. I guess maybe he's not as quick as he used to be, but still
Like
pretty
barely.
close to the
But
Drew
yeah,
Holiday
he
used to
makes up
be.
for it. Yeah, I mean, the thing for me is that it's honestly it's so speculative that it's so hard to make anything concrete. Like I don't want to, because the Timberwolves traded Cat. Well, I think regardless of the money thing, there were issues there, and there was for years now. There's been conversation and whispers around whether he might get traded, and I thought that a lot of that was quelled this year because of the playoff run that they did have. But yeah, I don't think I'm ready to start putting people on the you're next because of this, even though you're right. Like it is going to be an inevitable part of the future of the NBA. And honestly, it kind of sucks because like you don't want teams to break up because of that. You want them to break up because their time has come or because something went wrong. Or it's kind of a bummer, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be more difficult for guys to move when they want to, and it's probably going to become more common for guys to move when they don't want to, which isn't great. And I think we can expect a lot of off-season fun maneuvering, and now there's going to be difficult maneuvering that doesn't make much sense to people, and a whole lot of
Yeah.
math that people don't want to think about. And I know Keith and others are out there trying to figure out the money aspect of this deal because, as it looks right here, it doesn't work. So I think Charlotte's coming in as a third team, and there's going to be some other names moving around here. But this is the gist of it. Towns for Randle, DiVincenzo, and a Detroit pick. I don't know if there's any projections on there, but you can't go wrong with a Detroit pick
You
if you're
cannot go
Minnesota,
wrong.
who already added Dillingham and Shannon, a couple guys in the draft who look pretty good. And that's the other angle of this, right? For Boston and other teams living in this money space, you got to have some guys who are on rookie contracts coming up too. And that's where a Detroit first round pick is pretty valuable here, as well as DiVincenzo, who I know you mentioned earlier here. That's a tough one for New York because swapping Towns for Randle, you do that. You're giving up DiVincenzo, moving on from that whole Villanova thing, which obviously the players were super excited about, and losing a guy who found himself in that system and was so great into the playoffs. And, I keep thinking back to when the Celtics were reportedly trying to trade Grant for him when he was in Milwaukee. And that trade would have made a lot of sense looking back on it. Guy who's like cost controlled, shoots, handles, can defend his position, all that. He's a great player, one of the more underrated guys in the league, and he's going to be dangerous off that Minnesota bench. Like he'll be filling in for like what Kyle Anderson and I don't know who else was on that team last year filling those kind of minutes, but they needed a guy like that, and they get him here. And again, Randle comparable to Towns. The West is crazy. The West is tough, and losing like a Towns caliber guy is difficult there. But I'm sure that's the one player that both sides were really haggling over here. And I don't know if you even could haggle over him because of the money aspect here, but that's a tough one for New York. And, when they go to the team, and obviously I'm sure they're going to miss Randle like crazy because of just how beloved he was there. But in terms of what they did last year and where it looked like this was going, that's going to be tough for Brunson, tough for Bridges, who came over from Brooklyn, and Hart, who looked like they were about to do that whole Villanova thing. And even beyond that, he was just becoming a great fit there, DiVincenzo was.
Yeah, I feel for him. He's like at the top of the list of guys. This kind of does suck for, because I do think you found a home, and like you said, the Villanova thing was so cool. It's too bad that never actually panned out. I was kind of bummed about the opening night being against New York. Felt like it should have been a team that had a little bit more of a history with the Celtics, like maybe even Miami, even if it's less of a good team right now. Like I would have preferred the banner ceremony and everything to be against the team that has more history. But now this is kind of the team you want to see. So I'm glad that that's opening night. I'm glad that it's in less than a month now that these two teams will tip off, and that I think it's the team that has the most buzz around it, especially because this trade happened so late in the offseason. I feel like that always kind of makes things more exciting. But yeah, I mean, I do think this is going to work for New York, regardless of whether or not they beat the Celtics. Like, it's going to work because Karl-Anthony Towns can almost play like a role player type role here. Like, I think that they're not going to put the offensive load on him is not going to be that heavy, and it's not going to be as heavy as it was in Minnesota because you just have a lot of weapons on this in this Knicks lineup. Like, Mikal Bridges was the number one option last year. He wasn't great, but he was, right? And so Jalen Brunson's obviously shown that he can produce like very few players in the league. So I don't know. I think this is going to be good for Karl-Anthony Towns, honestly. The people that might lose are, I think right now, more on the Wolves side, but I could totally end up aging terribly.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's fair for both sides from a value standpoint. And here's the Knicks. You got Towns, who's probably going to start the season at the 5. OG slides to the 4 in that case, which is giving up a little bit of size depending on your opponent. Not against Boston right now, the way that both teams are set up, but that'll be interesting to see how that evolves. Brunson, Bridges, Hart, probably going to round out that starting lineup. But of course, Robinson out until December, January range. But this is the problem. Achua, who's like 6'8", was going to be starting at center for them. Jericho Sims, who's a big athletic leaper, didn't garner enough experience last year to make you believe in him. And then you got your McBride, and I guess Keita Bates-Diop's going to try, figure things out again here. Cam Payne came in as a veteran. The depth's not great losing DiVincenzo. This bench doesn't look on par with Boston's right now. But it is a formidable starting 5, and you're going to have some flexibility, right? You can move Towns to the 4 once Robinson comes back, play them together, play them with Achua a little bit, and you still got all those wings to throw at Boston. So it's still that thing we talked about where they got all those wings, they got all this versatility to try to defend a team like Boston. And when you add Towns to that mix, who he's not a rim protector, but I thought he did a much better job defending wings last year. Like, he could maybe stand with a Tatum and Brown for a few possessions here or there at the 4 if Robinson's behind him. It's going to be trickier with him at the 5. But again, he's going against Horford at that spot, and I think they're pretty comparable athletically and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be a pretty fair fight on opening night when you think of these guys who are in there. And with Porzingis out for that game, it's a tough matchup, especially, what I really want to see Towns do is go back to the interior, back guys down, use that post skill set he has that he started his career with. But I'm sure there's going to be a whole lot of shooting threes for Towns again here, which he's great at. But, attack Boston where they're vulnerable. We'll see if he's capable of it. And that's going to be the frustration for Knicks fans, right? This is going to be a tough transition for him because the expectations are going to be up through the roof playing in that city with their best team in recent history.
Yeah, I feel like he's already gotten like Knicks treatment, like that really heavy scrutiny. Like, it's almost surprising that he was only in Minnesota because I feel like he's been one of the more scrutinized figures on the national level. And a lot of it is honestly, I think, off the court things, just like his voice, stuff like that just became a big story around him. But I think Minnesota,
he has some frustrating aspects to his game too, though. I mean, nothing drives me crazy than a guy who can't stay in the game because of fouling. Like, that just can't happen. And he drives me crazy with that. Jaren Jackson. Yeah.
And so, you remember Drew Holiday last year when they matched up? There was I think the game in Minnesota, Drew was guarding Cat for like a big portion of the game, and it was actually going quite well. So I don't know, just thinking about how these teams even match up, like there's so many different ways that you could line these two up. It's honestly it's a pretty incredible. It's 2 really good starting 5s. That's the reality. Like, it's 2 very good starting 5s. I like Josh Hart as a starter. I think he probably would have come off the bench if it wasn't for this trade, and now he's probably inserted into the starting lineup, I would imagine. But yeah, I mean, I was kind of waffling on like who the top threat in the East was to the Celtics, and I feel right now that it's clearly the Knicks. Maybe the 76ers are trailing, and it's really hinging on like Embiid looking like he did in his MVP years, and Maxey making another leap. Like, this is the most complete team, I think, that is in the Eastern Conference outside of Boston.
Yeah, and I want to have that conversation before we get out of here. I want to give a shout out to our great sponsor, Nutrafol. And Nutrafol right now, as you know, giving you $10 off your first month subscription with free shipping right now over at Nutrafol. What is Nutrafol? They're the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand, trusted by over 1 million people. See thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. And as we transition into fall, we're already well there. I think even the calendar has said we're into fall at this point. Our schedules are busier, back to school, tighter work deadlines, basketball starting in our case, all these practices we're jumping into. It's easy to forget about taking care of yourselves during this busy season. One simple but effective thing you can do for yourself is start taking fall. Are you interested in having hair that grows faster, stronger, longer, having visibly thicker volume, experiencing noticeably less shedding, thicker lashes and brows? All that's possible with Nutrafol. Thinning hair is different for men and women, so a one-size-fits-all approach to hair growth doesn't cut it. Nutrafol has multiple formulas for men and women that are tailored to different life stages and lifestyle factors. That's a big one. So you can get just what you need. Physician formulated with 100% drug-free ingredients. Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting the key root causes of thinning: stress, hormones, aging, nutrition, lifestyle, and metabolism through whole body health. And again, everybody's different here, so they give you what you need. Get results you can run your fingers through. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code GARDEN. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code GARDEN, GARDEN. That's Nutrafol.com, code GARDEN. All right, let's stack them up. You said, and after this trade, New York's your top competitor in the East, top threat to Boston. Who are your top 5 at this point?
Ooh. This is exactly the kind of prediction that I would get wrong, but I would say New York, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Indiana, Miami. That's my top 5.
You still got Miami in the mix, huh?
I can't stop. I literally can't. I'm still giving them a boost from like 2 years ago. I don't know. I think at the end of the day, we're forgetting like how many injury woes they had last year. I think like Jaime Jaquez is primed to be a better player this season. I have a feeling we're going to see a better regular season from Jimmy Butler than we've seen in recent years, considering all the chatter around him and that he didn't have his big playoff burst last season. I'm giving them number 5. I mean, who else would be up there? The Cavs, potentially?
I can't quit the Cavs. I said that earlier.
I have Cavs.
Running it back. New coach. Played Boston decent with Mitchell in the lineup in that series. The offense, though, in the wing position. I mean, the Knicks have all the wings here. The Cavs have none of them. So that's the killer there. I'm going to go. I'll meet you at Philadelphia for 2, and they would have been 1 before this because of my Knicks concerns now addressed. If Embiid's healthy, and I know it's the most unlikely if ever at this point, but when he's healthy, they were right up there and challenged Boston pretty tough in those first few games they played early last season. So specifically for that matchup and given what they did, I think Paul George is such a great fit there. I'll have them 2, which is tough because I'm such a big Milwaukee believer too, and they are 3 for me as well. But the Middleton health and Lopez is 38, and they're 2 rookies being 19. And I like these guys, Prince and Wright and Trent coming in on minimums, but usually guys who are on minimums end up showing why they're on minimums. And Doc, who I love, but just doing Doc things over the last handful of years, including last year. A decent defensive coaching season for him, but overall he's had some tough finishes too. I get some of the Bucks skepticism as much as I love Giannis, but you still got to take Giannis seriously if you run into him in a series. That's 6-7 games on its own, I think, him being Giannis. So they could easily move up there, and he's probably a better bet to be healthy come playoff time than Embiid, because once Embiid goes down, the Sixers go down. I think even with George. they won't be able to stay in the mix without Embiid. 4, I will go Cavs, since I can't quit them. And I will put Indy 5. Good effort, good fight. Could even be Magic at that spot, given their defensive posture, because we see the biggest thing is, I know Missoula said it could have been 7, right? And it was the closest sweep you'll ever see. But they couldn't win a single game because they couldn't defend. Every time they needed a key stop, they couldn't get it. And I don't see anything different about that this time around. So I might actually put Orlando in there over Indiana. And it's tough. I like Indiana's style. Nembhard did his thing, McConnell. But I don't think they could win 4 games against Boston in almost any scenario.
I'm just going to give Indiana the respect of being, I still think, is the toughest series that they had last year. And for that reason, I feel like I have to put them in the top 5. But at this point, it hinges on a lot of things. Obviously, Tyrese Halliburton he's had his share of injury things, some health concerns. There were some reports in the Olympics that contributed to him not playing. So if he's not completely right, like, that team definitely is also in the category of, like, dependent on health and a little bit more uncertain. I'm trying to think, is there anybody else we're missing that should be in that top 5?
We mentioned Orlando briefly. You mentioned Miami. And that's 6, right? Teams in that mix. Then you're down to, like, the Atlantas, Charlotte, if you think they're coming.
Yeah.
It gets pretty bad pretty fast in that range.
I like that line. It gets pretty bad. Yeah, the Eastern Conference towards the bottom there. The Wizards,
The Wizards aren't going anywhere.
I saw that media poll where I was supposed to predict, like, who the worst team in the NBA was, and I said the Wizards.
Yeah, I think I did too. Could Toronto be interesting?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Are you talking
Quickly, Barrett, Barnes.
We saw that team.
Olynyk, Pirtle. Yeah, Barnes had a weird year, though. I think he had a big sophomore slump. Barrett quickly traded mid-season. We saw a little of it, but not a ton. I think terrible. I'm not ruling them out. Bruce Brown too, who's hurt, but
yeah. And he did have, like, a knee surgery, right? I saw that.
Yeah, he's probably gonna miss a little bit of the start of the season.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, here's the question for you. I was thinking about this. Do you think the Celtics will have the best record in the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, just because of the Jalen, Detroit, Pritchard 30 points when we don't play anyone thing. Because that's real. We saw that over and over and over again last year. I mean, they went 4-0 when Horford and Porzingis sat together. So their ability to win games last year when they were sitting sometimes 3 starters was out of this world. And they're probably gonna have to rest a little more. And like I've said, I'm mildly concerned about this Porzingis thing to start the year. But they won by 14 games last year, so they can be 10 games worse and still win by 4 games in that case, if all is equal. So I would bet pretty strongly the Celtics will have the best record in the East. If they don't, that's not great. But they could fall to 2, could fall to 3, as I've said, and still find their way to work through the playoffs. It would just be much tougher in the playoffs in that scenario.
Yeah. I actually think they probably won't get the number 1 seed.
So who do you like? New York?
I could see New York getting the number 1 seed. I still think the Celtics would beat them in a series. But it's so speculative now. It's like I was just looking at the WNBA preseason rankings, and they were so wrong that I feel like stupid even trying to predict this, but I guess that's the point. But yeah, I think just looking at this New York team, they match up well with most teams. I think they don't have any major holes now. They're going to be super motivated. They weren't playing through June, and some of the, Celtics have some things that are just, it's hard to come back from a championship season and be the number 1 seed. It doesn't happen often. That being said, if Jason and Jalen are playing at their peak level, then this is wrong. I think I'm accounting for some struggles, just natural stuff. But talking to Jalen today got me fired up. I'm he's about to have an MVP season was the vibe that we walked away from.
Yeah, it's interesting your point about the standings probably not finishing the way we think they will. last year you wouldn't have predicted Orlando 5. You
And
probably
in the
wouldn't have
West,
predicted Indiana 6.
I mean, the
Yeah, it's
Thunder are
talking
number 1 in the
specifically the
West.
East, though. I mean, the West
Yeah,
is just madness. No one knows how the West is going to finish. But in the
yeah.
East, I think you can rule out Detroit, Washington, Brooklyn, maybe even Chicago, but even they have some like feisty qualities usually and a good coach and all that. But to me, the 3 teams that are probably getting underrated a little bit would be Charlotte, Toronto, and Miami. I mean, you
I
always
think
think they're
Charlotte's getting
dead, and then they
overrated.
do. Really? Yeah,
Why are
maybe
we all
by
of a
the
sudden
people
high
who
on
like them.
Charlotte? Everybody's talking about Charlotte's the dark horse. I don't understand because they hired someone we like
Well, I
as a
think
coach.
most people think they'll miss the playoffs, and I think they could get in the playoffs.
Okay, I've been hearing some stuff about them getting in the playoffs. I feel like they're just like they're a popular pick right now for. And maybe I'm in too deep on NBA media consumption that I'm like reading everybody's preseason
Yeah,
picks,
no,
but
I,
I
I,
just
I
think
get what you're
buzz.
saying there. Yeah, I just think compared to last year. So you know what? I guess I'll replace them with Atlanta because
Okay.
they trade Murray. Everyone thinks they're probably dead. Young, all the criticism he gets, all that. But they still have a pretty solid roster. They've still played the Celtics pretty well compared to most teams over the last few years. And they have a great coach. So I don't think it would shock anyone for them to get the 8th seed out of that mix of teams we're talking about here. They might even be the favorite on paper to do it. So I guess I'd go Atlanta, Toronto, and the Heat among teams that could maybe rise higher than many people would think they would. And then for those teams that were there last year that you just think are going to be there again, Cleveland, Orlando, can they repeat it? Can Ben Caro cash in on this hype that's built up around him? And the Pacers, who literally decide to have the best offense ever and the worst defense ever. And I don't know how sustainable that is. And I like them. I like Neesmith. I like all the things they're doing there, but they got to figure out something new this year because I don't know if that's working again, what they did last year. So there could be some unpredictability there. Indiana could fall. Cleveland could fall. Miami could rise more
Yeah.
than we think. They'll probably not. And I don't know, Atlanta. So again, though, on paper, the East is probably a lot more straightforward than the West. And I'll still feel good about picking the Celtics 1, but we are just about less than a week away from games happening for the Celtics. Nuggets up next on Friday. We'll probably have one more preview of the preseason, young players, what to expect out of those games. Maybe we'll get a little bit more of a plan for who's playing in those games as well next week. But one more practice before the Celtics do depart to Abu Dhabi. We'll be there on Sunday, off day tomorrow. So look for more from us in a couple of days here. Noah Dalzell, check out You Got Boston. You got an episode tomorrow, right, coming?
Yep, yeah, I'll be up. I'll have something tomorrow, just recapping this week in training camp. I'll probably be going live, so feel free to join in and we can talk through all the observations and takeaways and everything.
Yeah, we didn't get to talk as much camp as I thought we might here, but big news here. We had to dive pretty deep on this Towns trade. So I know we'll have some training camp recaps going up. We have a ton of videos we did this week. We talked about Kada today. We talked about expectations for Jalen this year. I think that's an interesting one too. So go check those out on Celtics All Access. Of course, show some love to our sponsors. Prize Picks, great weekend to go over there. Use that code CLNS. Build yourself a daily fantasy team for the college games or the pro games on Sunday. Game Time, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase if you're looking for some tickets to events this weekend. Terms apply. And Nutrafol, get $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping at Nutrafol.com and use that code GAR. And again, crazy news in the NBA tonight. They always catch us out of nowhere. Towns to the Knicks. Just about done. I don't think it's official yet. They're still trying to find a third team. But it looks like this one's going to go through with Randle, DiVincenzo going back to Minnesota. How do you feel about the Knicks? Already a hot topic team. And, of course, the first team the Celtics will see on ring night. So this is it here. Towns at center, Brunson, Bridges, who came over from Brooklyn, the whole thing. It's going to be a crazy game. And two pretty fairly matched teams there. at least as they're currently constituted. So I can't wait. We'll be there, and it's going to start this path for the Celtics to repeat here. So again, thanks for joining us here. A ton of you talking about this.
Yeah, everyone's
trade
excited
here
about
with
the
us.
trade.
Yeah, it's that's how it goes. People love the activity. So appreciate the NBA giving us this to talk about tonight. A really fascinating move. Interested to see what the other guys think of it. I think they were all asleep because I didn't hear from any of them tonight. So we'll hear from them next week on this and more, and we'll talk to you then. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Wait, Amit's got an outro for us, I think.
No, he doesn't.
He said he was going to work on an outro.
He had a phenomenal game.
Phenomenal.
Forfeit's out. I think it's an option. That did not sound like a chair.
It was a freaking chair. It does sound like a chair.